Hey, good morning. Welcome to Instant Breakfast right here on CHSR and 97.9 FM in Fredericton, your only alternative radio station. Thanks so much for being here, John, on Thursday mornings. I really appreciate it. And how are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm looking forward to today's show. Our playlist is going to be 100% instrumental music.
I love instrumental music.
Me too. And, you know, it's not something that you commonly hear on top 40 playlists, with maybe the exception of Axel F. Remember that Jan Hammer tune that was off of Beverly Hills Cop way back in the 80s? Like, that's the only kind of electronic tune that I can remember being on a top 40 pop playlist for any extended period of time. So
I don't remember it, but I think I don't want to either. Probably would if you played it.
I think you would. I think you would. It was it was an iconic tune at the time, and of course people are familiar with things like the Blade Runner soundtrack. Vangelis did that one, and of course there's all classical music and jazz and stuff like that is common, but they're all niche markets now. So you turn on the radio and you're bound to hear lyrical songs, and then hip hop, of course, is the emphasis on the lyrics. So I thought we'd provide a little counterbalance to that and do all instrumental music today. And I thought we would emphasize electronic instrumental music predominantly, and weird electronic music at that. So,
even better.
Yeah, I'll do some stuff
that just gets better and better.
Yeah, well, might as well train people's ears to listen to stuff that they're unfamiliar with. It's a really good exercise.
It is, and I know there are actually a lot of people out there that will not listen to music unless it has lyrics.
Yeah,
and
I know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Until recently, when people told me. I had no idea.
Yeah,
I just assumed everybody liked all kinds of music.
And of course, it's really two kind of forms of art coming together, in the center. And the lyrics are, akin to poetry, but music in and of itself. I think it's an important thing to train your ears to hear all the components of the musical aspect of a song. I mean, there's so much richness that can be garnered from that.
I know I have been trained to like different kinds of music that I never liked before.
Yeah, jazz was something that took me a little while too, especially like modern abstract jazz. I remember getting a Branford Marsalis album sort of in his latter period where he was doing really experimental stuff. And
I saw him live.
Oh, you're so lucky.
In a church, no less.
Yeah. And I remember my first play of that album, I didn't really understand it all. I had no reference point, really, to understand that music. It was so out there. But, after maybe 10, 20 listens, it started to really make an awful lot of sense. And I just developed an intense love for that kind of music. Stuff like Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, which was the advent of modal jazz music that really formless. It didn't have that cleanly inscribed structure that was the expectation of most tunes at that point in time. That was a really free-form, improvisational, experimental type of jazz. And classical music has its own counterparts too. There's so much variety in instrumental music too, and it gets put to other purposes too. The most notable being like soundtracks for films and television. And if you were to strip away the music from any of those mediums, then you would be left something that seems really hollow and toneless.
It would be a huge void. Yeah, I don't think people even realize.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover between people producing electronic music and people writing music for film and television.
Interesting. Well, I'm really glad you came up with this idea today. I love it.
We're going to start out with someone who I didn't know about until I started hunting around. It's a guy originally out of Moncton, William MacLeod. He currently lives in Montreal, but he's been around for quite a while. He came to internet fame during the MySpace era.
Okay.
MySpace kind of exists now, but it's not the mecca for music that it used to be. So Bandcamp and YouTube have superseded that. But at the time, that was, if you're doing independent music and wanted to get it out to people, that was the main streaming site for getting your music out. So he's been around since that era, and he's been doing breakcore music. You might recognize the term breakcore from Wangle Teb in Fredericton, who does that, and it's a style. It's like electronic dance music, but it's got like really heavy kick drums and like fast snare and weird breaks and all kinds of different sampled sources. Played at really fast tempo. It's really aggressive type of electronic music. This musician, William McLeod, he goes by the handle Oxygenfad. So he would be right at the advent of this type of music with his he's got like 40 albums or so.
Wow.
I lost count as I was going through his Bandcamp page, but he's been
Holy
doing this for a long
moly.
time.
Wow.
Yeah. If you go to his Facebook page, it's the Church of Oxygenfad.
Wow. Yeah, here I see. Get all 85 Oxygenfad releases available on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
Save 90%.
He was ahead of the curve in a bunch of different ways. So he was an early adopter of the idea of letting your music be downloaded for free in high quality as a way of spreading it amongst people. He does have like physical releases. His earlier releases were LP, CD, that sort of thing, but he always provided full quality digital downloads of his music. We're going to listen to a tune off his 2017 album Tensor Calculus, and it's called KKSlider is a Good Doggo. It's a great tune. It's a good way to start the set.
Oxygenfad. That was so super fun. What's coming up next, John?
Well, this whole idea of the instrumental show came because Sleepy Driver, the band that I play with, is involved in something called the Fuse Fest this weekend at Memorial Hall. And Fuse Fest is this fusion of classical musicians with modern rock, pop, whatever musicians. Last year, Motherhood was a band, and what happens is Motherhood collaborated with a bunch of different classical musicians. I think a lot of them are from Symphony New Brunswick, but other people too, and put this mashup together of two what you would think are completely different types of music, and you get this weird and wonderful mixture. So this year, Sleepy Driver was invited to become part of the festivities happening this Saturday at 7:30, and so we're playing with a bunch of musicians who we've played music from some of them before. Like Greg Harrison, for instance, is a percussionist originally from Fredericton. Now he lives in Toronto, and he does percussion for dance and film and various other types of music. He's in bands and all sorts of other things too. But so he's the guy who I think founded this festival. And then we have a couple of other well-known New Brunswick classical musicians, Andrew Reed Miller, who plays with Symphony New Brunswick on the double bass, and Richard Hornsby is playing the clarinet. He teaches music at UNB. I'm not sure who else is involved. We haven't had our first practice yet, but there's a viola, a couple of percussion instruments. So I thought, since we're doing this interesting fusion, let's play a couple of songs from some of the musicians who are involved. It might be an interesting opportunity. And then I thought, if we're doing that, let's make the whole show instrumental.
I think that is very good thinking. I like it a lot.
Thought we would start with Andrew Reed Miller, who is a classical bass player and a composer. He lives in St. John, originally from New York. He's the principal bass player of Symphony New Brunswick. So he plays, a lot of your standard classical music, but he's also very inclined to do experimental music. And so he's also the founder and the artistic director of Resonance Incorporated, which is an organization out of St. John, and they are dedicated to doing experimental music productions and collaborations. They've been around since 1998. They were at one point called Motion Ensemble, and there was actually an experimental chamber orchestra by the same name, Motion Ensemble, that you may have heard play around. And they do a lot of interesting fusion with audio-visual stuff and interactive electronics and extended instrumental techniques. I don't know, taking an instrument and playing it in ways that it wasn't normally intended to.
Oh, that is so very interesting.
Yeah.
I love it.
So I found this really cool clip off YouTube.
Love it already.
And remember when we played the Tin Pan Darlings a few weeks ago, they had done a silent film, and in their CD release we're playing a soundtrack to that silent film. So their album was the soundtrack for the film. They had the film projected on a big screen in the background, and they were playing along to it. That was typical of movies in the early age of cinematography. There was no sound in it, right? So you watch those old films, and there's usually like an instrumental soundtrack underneath, and basically words on the screen in place of dialogue. So that was, film's been around probably since the 1890s or so, and for the first 30, 40 years of that, there was no sound. So what would happen when you saw a film at a theater is there would usually be an orchestra or some form of music playing in the orchestra pit, or often it was improvisational in nature, but sometimes it was also scored. This YouTube clip that I found is a clip from an old 1920s German expressionist film called Nosferatu, which is a vampire movie. It was actually based on Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. They just changed it a little bit, changed some of the names, followed fairly closely the storyline, and they were actually sued for it. And the film company went bankrupt, and basically all of the reels were pulled, but a couple of them survived. So we still have this, and it's considered a work of art in retrospect. It's just a fantastic film. I used to have a copy of it at one point, and so I've seen it multiple times, and it's just this fantastic film. So Andrew Reed Miller composed a score for this, and they played it with Symphony New Brunswick back in 2017 at the Imperial Theatre. So they had the film playing in the background at the theatre and the orchestra down in the pit up front. And we're going to listen to a little segment from that. It's very experimental in tone. It's not what you typically think of when you hear classical music. Although users might be, their ears might be somewhat tuned to the use of modernist classical music and film scores. So the scene that we're going to watch, because our viewers we're watching the YouTube video, but our viewers aren't going to be able to see it. You can always go to YouTube and Google Nosferatu Andrew Reed Miller. We're watching the very last scene of the film where the Dracula figure named Count Orlok. He becomes so engrossed in drinking his victim Ellen's blood that he forgets about the coming day, and then the sun streams through the window and he's exposed to the sunlight. He dies, and then Ellen, his victim, wakes up momentarily and has a dramatic scene, and then she also dies. And then we end with a long shot of Count Orlok's castle up in the hill, and
it's a beautiful shot.
It really
I just love it. Like, I could easily have that hanging in my house.
It's a beautiful film. I would highly recommend people take a look at it.
All right. So are we ready to hear it?
Yep. Nosferatu
Nosferatu.
by Andrew Reed Miller.
That was super intense. That filming was beautiful.
Yeah, and I think you can see the entire Nosferatu film on YouTube. Not with that particular score, I don't believe, but you can. It's in the public domain at this point in time, as are a number of other films from the early 1900s. Metropolis is a classic film from that era, and then there's a Russian film director, Sergei Eisenstein, who has a number of iconic films. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is another horror film from around that time. They're all really good watches, and just interesting to see that perspective. I mean, how do you craft a film with no sound?
Very cool. Thank you, John.
So I thought we'd move to another person next, who is one of the founders of the Fuse Festival, and he's also someone who played in Queen Cab with Peter Hicks. I know that you love that Queen Cab album.
I do. I play that all the time.
Greg Harrison, who goes under the handle Grej, G-R-E-J. He's from Fredericton. I think he still comes back here semi-regularly, but he's based out of Toronto now, and he's a drummer and a percussionist, I guess, and also a composer, and he's done a lot of compositions for dance and film, and he's performed with like Cirque du Soleil, Fred Penner, some people you would definitely recognize. He's also collaborated with Sabian, just out in Meductic here, an internationally known cymbal maker, and they've created a form of lo-fi cymbals that he found useful for his purposes. He's got an album called Glass Houses for Marimba that was selected as a CBC's top 10 classical albums of 2015. He's been nominated for an ECMA for Classical Recording of the Year 2017. Plays in a bunch of different groups. He's got this marimba duo called Tactus, and a jazz trio called Falcon Punch, and synth pop band called Monarch. So he's all over the map in a wonderful way, doing just really interesting creative things. And we have listened to him before from one of his dance compositions, entire dance performance based around a sequence of songs. And we're going to listen again today to another one. This is a different show called Chasing the Path and a song called Tracing. He uses drums in really kind of unorthodox ways too, so you hear a lot of odd sounds out of like scraping on the cymbals and just various things. I don't pretend to understand all the things that he's doing, but you definitely hear some innovative techniques being used to the drums. And he also introduces a lot of synth pad, interesting textures that way.
This was released not that long ago.
Yeah, this was released 2018,
Yeah.
So his most recent composition.
Are we ready to hear it?
Yeah, a song called Tracing off Chasing the Path.
The scent leaves a trail. The solemn ruts refreshed. The broken doors, the stained teeth, the hands that cup the face. Here and forgotten. Balancing my every wave. I reach up to you. I walk into you.
That was fun. I enjoyed that.
I really enjoyed your version of the dance. You're a fantastic dancer, Tammie.
Thank you. I thought so. Okay, so I'm totally stoked for what's coming up next.
At the risk of being self-serving, I'm going to play a Sleepy Driver tune, but because it's related to the last two, so we will be collaborating with the previous two musicians and some other classical musicians this weekend at the Fuse Fest. I think maybe one of the things that spurred this on was this album that we put out, which is not standard for, if anyone thought that Sleepy Driver would be putting out an instrumental album, would have called them crazy, but this happened last year. It's called Decomposed, the album, and it's called Decomposed because what we did, and we were kind of in a gap between albums, working on a new album. It had been a year and a half or so since the last one, and so we wanted something to just fill in that time and keep people attuned to the fact that we're still in existence. So Peter came up with this really interesting idea of taking a number of tracks across our 5 albums and stripping out all of the drums and all of the heavy guitars and all of the vocals and remixing those songs. Not recording anything new, but remixing those songs in a way that sort of illustrated the composition that laid underneath it. So that's why it's called Decomposed, because we really decomposed it. It's not because it could also be an allusion to a decomposing body, knowing the lyrics that This is the blurb that Peter put out about the album. If this album had a concept, it is one of texture and the revelation that underneath the surface of a recorded song lives a whole other piece of music. When you strip away the composition, key song elements like the words, the bass chords, the vocal melodies, and you let the instruments that support the song come through to the forefront, what remains is no less beautiful, no less unnerving. Sometimes what is left bears no resemblance to the original song. That's very true. Like, I barely recognize these songs.
Me too, yeah.
And
I've
you know,
listened to them quite a bit too.
when years have passed since you recorded a song, you forget the parts that you play. I mean, we take a very compositional approach to our music, and so there are layers upon layers upon layers, and often those layers are indiscernible. You hear the ones that we want people to hear at that particular point in the song, but there's an entire supporting musical creature underneath that if you were to pull out those songs, you would notice, but you don't necessarily notice those sounds when they're merged in with the whole. So this was doing an instrumental album in exactly the opposite way that most people set out to do an instrumental album, by stripping everything away and letting some of the parts really breathe.
You know, what might be really interesting too is to hear Decomposed and then the one that you originally recorded.
And I've actually done that too, because it's just such a strange feeling to have this song that you know so well, that you've played over and over again, and then hear an entire different facet of it. It's strange, and it's kind of exciting. I remember getting little shivers up my spine listening to some of these tunes. It's like, wow.
You never released this on hard copy, did you?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
No, this is an entirely digital album.
Yeah.
We're going to listen to the tune Telling You Terrible Things, which was off. We did an extended release of our first album and added 4 songs to it. One of those songs was a song called Blue-Eyed Boy.
I love that. It's like or close to the last track on that.
Yeah, I think it is the
It's
last
the
track.
last track on that, and
Yeah.
it is just such a great track.
Off Steady Now, the extended
Yes.
version. So here we call it Telling You Terrible Things. That's one of the lines from the song. All of the heaviness has been pulled away, and now it's this light, ethereal, almost more haunting song, although it's a very haunting song in the original state. Well, let's start the cheers.
All right, here we go. Now that would be an amazing soundtrack. Holy moly, that is gorgeous. And John, are all those stringed instrument sounds coming from the electric organ? Or
Yeah, it's an orchestral string sample off of one of my keyboards.
yeah.
Yeah, and the bass is actually that same orchestral string sample from what I remember. But I mean, it's been a long time, and it all went together so quickly. Like, I don't know, you jump into the studio and you just put stuff together as quickly as you can, and you forget it almost as immediately as you put it down. And then that's not a song that we play with the full band often, although we do a version of that song with a trio, but it's a completely different version of that. All of the orchestration is difficult to accomplish. But I think we are going to be doing, it's undecided which song we're going to do, but we're going to do a song off of Decomposed with the orchestra this weekend.
That is going to be such a great show. At the Playhouse?
No, it's at Memorial Hall over
Okay.
at the university.
Oh, and it's on Saturday night.
Saturday, yeah, and I think we have an afternoon thing. It's like a workshop where we talk about the collaboration process.
Everyone's invited. You don't have to be a musician to
No.
attend that workshop.
No, we'll
just
have-
if you're interested.
We'll have a bunch of instruments there, and you can bring your own instruments also. And
But if you don't have an instrument, it's still okay.
yeah, it's still totally okay. Yeah.
Okay. Promise I won't show up with my pots and pans.
Oh no, bring them. Yeah. Bring some lights. Remember from Zom? Lights is an instrument.
That I could do. Or I'll just maybe do some dancing, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
To
Yeah,
keep
some
people
interpretive dance.
interpretive dancing
Mhm.
as we go along. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys, to CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton Instant Breakfast. And my host, John, today is bringing us all instrumental music, and it so far has been pretty mind-blowing.
We're going to lighten the tone a little bit with some Joyful Noise, a Fredericton band who came out with a great album in 2017 called Cocoloco. They're like a jazz fusion kind of band. They've got really great catchy riffs, and I don't know, they remind me a lot of John Scofield's sort of later stuff that's got a lot of electronica in it. And Uber Jam is one of my favorite John Scofield albums. Went to see him down in Portland, Maine to play. It was a great show, and this to me has that same experimental feel, and I think Joyful Noise is a great name because there seems to be so much joy in their playing.
And
it
is,
really comes
although
through.
it's experimental, it's still very melodic to
And
me.
is very accessible.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fusion, but it's that kind of jam band fusion that's really been popularized on the jam band circuit. Colin Fowley wrote a review, and he said, "If you're a fan of great instrumental music, this EP is a no-brainer. If you aren't a fan of great instrumental music, there's a very good chance that this record will change your mind." Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Apparently their name comes from Derek Truck's album of the same name, but before that, it comes from a quote from the Bible. Psalm 98:4 says, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all the earth, make a loud noise, and rejoice and sing praise." We're going to listen to a tune off of Joyful Noises' album Cocoloco called Quantum Fish Sticks.
Fredericton's very own Joyful Noise. And I'm telling you, it is joyful. Got to check those guys out live.
Yeah, and that's Corey McNeil on the guitar, Jason Barbet on the drums, and Camilo Villemazir Baez on bass. I think he usually goes by Camilo V because people
I call him Cam.
Yeah, I practiced.
Really impressed with that. Thanks, John, for being here. And what a beautiful album cover this is coming up.
Yeah, this is Open Strum. His name's Michel Gauguin. So he's from Moncton, multi-instrumentalist, singer-songwriter. Does a lot of rock music, but also a lot of world music, and specializes in open tunings on his guitar. Creates all kinds of interesting multi-layered sounds. So we've got just a single here called Rising Eagle, and the interesting thing about this new single is that it has a guy named Jared Scharf on lead guitar, and he is the lead guitarist on Saturday Night Live.
No way.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, isn't that cool? I don't know how they met, but they did, and we have this really cool guitar song.
I'm stoked to hear this,
Yeah.
and it's called Rising Eagle.
It's called Rising Eagle.
All right, let's hear it. Whoa, that gets my pick of the day. Sleepy Driver would have, but it made me cry, so that cancels that right out.
That's okay.
A lot packed in there to a couple minutes.
Yeah, really tight.
Really tight. Even some acoustic coming through in there.
Yeah,
Like,
that would be Michel Gauguin on the acoustic.
oh my
and,
God.
So the Saturday Night Live guitar player would have done the electric on that too.
Right. That was a Rising Eagle from Open Strum.
This is our metal moment. Got to sneak some
Cool.
metal in, even if it's an instrumental show. And so we're going to do something that is experimental noise metal. It may not be for everybody's ears. Post-punk, maybe. A little bit of that.
I love
A guy out of Moncton named Guillaume Aubé put out this little EP in 2017. Goes under the handle Mombius Hibachi. He's been in a bunch of bands since the early 2000s. Deadwood, the Guillaume Aubé Band, Sky Pop. This is how he characterizes his music on Bandcamp. Mombius Hibachi is the grungy goo under your feet, momentarily taking a breath of air in the form of music or video, taking influence from bands like the Melvins, Tool, David Bowie, etc., but finding its own path. It is what it is. Take it or leave it. Consider it the musical equivalent to broccoli. Plug your nose and give it a try. So we're going to listen to
awesome.
a very experimental tune called Requiem for a Nap.
I love it. I love that title too.
I love
Requiem
this
for
tune
Nap.
too. It's
Cool.
really weird, but
All right, let's
really
hear
wonderful.
Whoa. Okay, go.
All right, we've got time for just a part of one tune. I know nothing about this, so it's perfect. I don't have to say anything. It's something that appeared on Bandcamp this year by a individual, I guess, Burning, an album called Titled, and a song called Bugs.
Perfect. Thanks for listening, guys. Really appreciate it. See you next week.